Do we take anything with us to heaven? I got this question from a young friend in this awesome card, and they asked me this specifically. Do we take our clothes to heaven? And I think this is a great question, but I want to broaden it out and ask the question of, do we take anything with us to heaven? Now, having said that, I don't want to ignore the question about clothing, and so today we're going to do a 2-for-1 deal. We're going to talk about, do we take anything with us to heaven? But we're also going to ask the question of, if there's clothing in heaven, what's that going to be like? So let's look at both of these things together. Most journeys we take, we bring along at least a few things with us. If you've ever had the joy of going camping, you'll know that when you go camping, you take a lot of things with you. But even if you go on a short trip, maybe an hour or two from where you live, you'll typically take a few things with you. You'll take your wallet, your phone, or in my case, a phone charger as well, because my phone is constantly dying. But what about our permanent move to heaven? Will we take anything with us if we have the privilege of going to heaven? Now, I say privilege because we've got to understand that going to heaven is not something that everybody gets to experience. It's for those who cry out to Jesus for the forgiveness of their sins. If you do that, if you have the privilege of going to heaven, should you expect to take anything, and I mean anything, with you? And the short answer to that question is simply no. And we find that hard to compute. We're like, okay. Because even if, for example, I run out of the door quickly on a morning because I've discovered our house has no milk in it, I'll typically take something with me, right? I'll be clothed. Everywhere we go, we take something with us. We find this hard to understand, and yet it's exactly what the Bible teaches us, that we take nothing. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 7 says this, "For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world." And this isn't just one Bible verse that talks about this. There's various other ones. I'll give you a couple of examples if you want to look them up. Job 1:21, Psalm 49 verse 17, or Ecclesiastes 5:15. They all talk about this concept that we bring nothing with us into the world, and we take nothing from the world when we leave it. And so we don't take money, we don't take toys, we don't take prized possessions with us. And what this highlights for us is a very important truth, that we cannot and should not cling too tightly to any of the blessings, any of the gifts that God gives us in this lifetime. The only thing that we can cling to in this life that won't eventually slip through our grasp is God Himself. Now, my young friend asked a very good question about clothing specifically. And so if we're not going to take our clothing with us, will there be clothing in heaven, and what will it look like? And I asked the question, will there be clothing, because of Adam and Eve in the garden? If you read the first few books of the Bible, before sin came into the world, what it tells us is that Adam and Eve were naked. But the sigh of relief for those of you who are modest is that I think the Bible points us to the truth that there will be clothing in heaven. The reason I say that is because when the Bible talks about angels or people in the present heaven, it describes them as wearing white robes. A couple of examples of references to that, if you want to look them up, is Acts chapter 1, verse 10, or Revelation 7, verse 9. Now, most of us, we're not super excited about this idea of white robes. We're kind of picturing people walking around in very bleached bathrobes. But that's because it's not culturally relevant for us. So let's look at this idea of white robes for a second. There's two important things here. First thing is that robes were normal attire for most of human history. And especially in Bible times, that was normal. It was normal to wear a robe. And so when it talks about white robes in heaven, it may be just kind of symbolic of wearing something that feels normal or familiar to us. Maybe it will be exactly robes, or maybe it will be something that's familiar and normal to us. The second thing to highlight is the fact that it talks about white, the importance of this whiteness of this clothing. This idea of white is symbolic of purity, of our purity in heaven. Or more correctly, Jesus' purity given freely to us. The reason we will wear white robes is because Jesus' forgiveness and grace and cleansing has come upon us. And so this brings us full circle back around to what we said earlier about the privilege of going to heaven. All of us have the chance to go to heaven, but it's only through Jesus. He is the only one who can wash us of our sins and make us, as the Bible talks about it, white as snow. Thanks for joining us for this video. If you have questions, feel free to send them in. There's information in the description below on how you can do that. And obviously, we'd love for you to subscribe so you can hear more of these videos as they're published. Thanks for joining us today.